Fresh off the North London derby win. What is happening, people? It's your boy Act Beats back again. Big up the Gooners, the Arsenal. Yes. Fresh off the North London derby win. North London is red. Don't get it twisted. Rivalry aside, I'm not trying to isolate myself, but come on! Got a little cheeky one. I'm going to be talking about EQ, equalisation, and the basics of equalisation, how you should use it, when you should use it. And although a lot of it is subjective, there are some rules of thumb which you can apply across instrument ranges and groups. That is a good guide to stick with, and then use your ears from there. So I just wanted to touch on what I was taught when I was getting into mixing and the understanding of the different sounds and their frequency ranges and how to treat those sounds, and then just give you that so you can trust your own ears to go off and experiment yourself. But as a guide, this is a very solid guide across the board. It's used by a lot of people in terms of the thought process behind what you're boosting and where you're boosting, and just how you should treat equalization and instruments in general. So first, disclaimer, when it comes to equalization, the idea is to be subtractive. So when I say that, I mean with equalization, if you've got a sound and the sound source is good, it might need cleaning up. There might be bits of the sound that you don't like. To keep something more musical and as close to its original sound source as possible, the idea is to take away rather than boosting frequencies and changing the natural sound and kind of creating artifacts that are unnatural to that natural sound source. And then once you've got your subtractive equalization done, or you're happy with your original sound source, there's certain areas within those instruments and sound frequencies that can enhance the sound and are more musical. Always bear in mind, when you approach equalization, you want to approach it from a clean point of view. So it's about cleaning up anything that's unwanted and not changing the natural sound source. And once you've got that out of the way and you're happy with your natural sound source and it sounds good, then you can go ahead and get experimental with boosting frequencies and making more musical decisions with what you're doing with your equalization. With that said, what we're going to do is we're going to look into just a basic principle of EQing a drum part. So we're going to EQ kick, we're going to EQ snare, we're going to look at EQing percussion and EQing hats, and what I would do and what my approach is. And that would be a good benchmark and starting point for you to take towards your mixes, and then use your ears to move on from there and start experimenting yourself depending on what sounds you're using. And then if that goes down well, then we'll look at bass and keys and strings and other instruments, synths, and their frequency ranges and what we can do to that. And then we can make a kind of mini basics EQ guide for you guys to get stuck into. So with that said, let's get into it. Applying EQ it should be a tasteful thing. There should be a reason for it, right? Don't just twist the pots for the sake of it, okay? Inexperience will teach you that because there's a pot there, you need to twist it, and that might do something good, and you might get the magic dust from it, and that's just not the case, okay? So don't go around twisting things for the sake of it. Understand what you're twisting and why you're wanting to twist it, okay? Often when you think about something being muddy, for example, the temptation might be to go to that sound source and try and fix it. Try and think more broadly across the frequency range. There might be another instrument that's affecting that sound. If you've got like a muddy sounding kit and you're trying desperately to EQ the hell out of it to try and get it to pop through, it might be that actually the low frequencies in the bass is washing it out, and it's the bass that actually needs some kind of cut from it to allow the kick to come through, and you don't actually need to add EQ to the kick at all and change its natural sound. With that in mind, we want to start looking into cleaning up sounds first. Now, the best way to clean up sounds with equalization is making use of the filters, high pass filters and low pass filters, taking frequencies from the lower end of the sound or the higher end of the sound and basically sweeping them out. So as you move your EQ in, everything below is getting cut out and you're taking it away from your sound, or the other way around, high from low pass in the high, okay? Assume that you understand that and you can get rid of unwanted frequency using low pass and high pass filters. The next step would be to go in and shape the sound source using EQ and the parameters. So let's have a look at the kick first, right? Right, so this is the kick without equalization. So as a sound source, it's pretty solid actually. It's got some nice attack. It's got a bit of weight to it. It sounds a bit papery in places, a bit thin. So my approach to it would be to kind of give it a bit more meat and beef it out, right? And so when it comes to kicks, there are some areas and rules of thumb that you can follow across all of your mixes and then adjust accordingly based on your subjectivity and what you're trying to do within the sound. So let's have a quick look at that. So generally speaking, when it comes to kick drums, the 40 to 80 hertz range in the kick is going to add sub, right? You're going to get a lot of your sub bass information from that. So if we go in, have a look at what I've done here, you can see that high pass filter to shave off anything below 20 hertz, just because anything below 20 hertz is just rumble and noise anyway. It's not really audible, and it just messes up the low end of a mix if there's lots of low frequencies rumbling around. With this second band, you can see I'm boosting around 60 hertz for that specific reason. I want to get a bit more sub out of it, right? So this is the kick. This is with the sub dialed in. Hear a lot more meat, a lot more beef with it, right? Now you can go ahead and filter sweep between 40 to 80 to find the range you want, and that will help you determine what you decide and what sounds best. What I would do as a rule of thumb is always turn it off, move it, put it where you think it will sound good, then put it back on. That way you'll save fatigue on your ears. Big gem, right? The temptation to sweep is there where you can get away from it. Always take it off, put it in place where you'd want it, then engage it again and listen to it. As you can see, I've chosen 60 hertz to add my sub. Like I said, 40 to 80 hertz is the range that you want for your sub. And then the next band that we've got is between the 80 and 150 hertz range, and that's to give a bit more presence. It will give you power, attack, and weight to your kick, right? So if you imagine the 40 to 80 range giving you the sub, the next range between 80 to 150 is going to give you more of the hit, more of the thump. So let's have a listen to that. Feel that presence, the thump of the kick is there, right? It's really nice. The next frequency you want to look at is cutting. Remember I said about cleaning up anything that's unwanted. With kick drums, the tendency is the more you EQ things and the louder you make them within the lower range, things can sound quite boxy, like they've been put into a space. In order to change that, we can cut between the 200 and 300 hertz area. You want to put a bit of a higher Q on it because you want to be a bit more surgical. It doesn't need to be that broad. And then you want to bring that down a bit, and that'll get rid of the boxiness of the kick. So let's have a listen to it without. It kind of feels like it's enclosed in this bassy space. When I cut it, it will allow that thump and sub to cut through a lot cleaner. Without. With. Gives it a bit more clarity whilst keeping all of the integrity of the sub and the thump that we've dialed in, right? So the next band we've got is one that should be treated with care. It's usually roughly somewhere between 450 and 1.5 kilohertz. And basically that's going to give you a bit more attack. You don't want to get too clicky and get crazy with it. So small boosts in this with a small curve, but it will give you a little bit more presence, like a beater hitting a drum, and just provide that extra bit of presence when it's matched up against a heavy bass part, for example, yeah? And then lastly, what I like to do is take my filter and then filter out as much as I can from the top before affecting the sound naturally, right? So I will just dial it back until I hear it start to shave the frequencies and nullify it, just so I know that it's not allowing any information through that I don't really need in the higher end. And this is what we'll end up with. So now that we've got it all highlighted and we've discussed it, let me play with and without. So this is without. And this is with. As you can hear, it's a lot more weighty. It's got attack. It's really, really beefed up, but it's there. It's present. It's not going to get washed out. It's going to cut through a heavy bass part, and that's what we really want with that kick element, especially when it comes to hip hop or anything that's focused heavily around the kick as the driving force behind the drum part. So, as a basic principle and guide and rule of thumb, those frequency bands that I've highlighted and what you can expect to get from them is a good way to approach your kick. Now let's look at the snare. So this is the snare without. And this is the snare with. Subtle changes, but they make big differences in the context of the larger drum part. With the snare, firstly, a good sound source is desirable. Whether you're recording it live or choosing a sample, snares are complex sounds. They fill up a lot of the frequency spectrum. They can be quite low and muddy. They can be very high and pitchy, and there can be a lot of attack in the middle as well. So you want to make sure you've got a really nice, crisp sounding sound source that isn't distorted, which has been recorded well, or at least matches the kind of direction of sound that you want to go in initially anyway. So again, you can see I've used my filter or filters to shave off the low frequencies that aren't needed, also the higher frequencies. Second band, what you want to do, you want to add some weight to your snare. Now we cut off a bit of the low end from it because we don't want it to interfere with the kick drum and the bass, but we still want some weight and a meaty presence in the lower end of the snare. So what we want to do is we want to try and look at the 150 to 200 hertz realm and see if we can dial in a little bit of a boost to give us some of that presence in that lower end. So let's have a listen to what we got here. So as you can see, we're around about 170 hertz, and we're adding roughly around 3 to 4 dB, somewhere like that, for this sound source. It's important to note that with the Ableton EQ8, it's quite forgiving. You can boost quite a lot before it starts to really affect the sound. Some EQs that you might be using from some of your favorite plugin developers, you might only get away with maybe half the boost values here. Generally speaking, boosting somewhere between 1 to 2 is more than enough. With this EQ8 in Ableton, you can push it a bit more before you start to add distortion or change the overall sound of what you're going for. So yeah, to add some weight to the snare, you want to look at 150 to 200 hertz basically. The next element we've got is anywhere between 900 and 1.6 kilohertz. So 900 hertz or 1.6 kilohertz is going to help give you some real attack and presence. If you imagine a drummer hitting a rim shot, so he's hitting the middle of the drum and the rim at the same time, and you're getting that massive whack sound. That's that kind of area of the frequency spectrum that you're affecting here. So by dialing that up even slightly, you can get a real presence from the drum that will really pierce and cut through a busy guitar or piano or a synth. Okay, that's what we got here. So with this next frequency band, we're looking at somewhere between 1.75 and 2.75, and that's where you're going to get a lot of the crack of the snare. So that the stick really piercing the middle of the drum and getting crack, getting a bit of presence from the wires underneath. Again, just subtle boosts in these areas, but they will make a big difference when they're cutting through against more busier parts in the track. Very slight, but you can hear the difference, and they do make the biggest difference in the context of a whole track. Now, the last band that you want to look at is anywhere between 3 and 5 kilohertz. That is typically where you would hear the sound of the wires of a snare. So underneath the drum where the wires are, where you get that little sizzle sound, the rasp, if you like. Boosting that on a live snare is really going to bring those sounds out. Obviously, this is a really super processed side click type of snare. So you're not going to get too much of that anyway, but just by subconsciously dialing that up, I'm trying to bring out any kind of information within that realm to kind of help bring out what that sound would normally be. And this is what we're getting with that. Again, it's subtle, but makes a difference. It's almost adding like a bit of crackly air to it, and just to help drive it a bit more. And then, like I said, we use the filter at the end just to pull back anything above 18, and you can bring it down even lower than that, towards 10 if necessary. So that's it for the snare. Let's move on to what I would do with percussion. So I've got my percussion grouped here all onto one track, and that's because I like to treat my percussion pretty much the same. If you imagine a live studio recording, the majority of percussion tends to be recorded in a quite a big room, or in a room that's got some space in it, and there's a fair bit of distance between the mic and the shaking percussion, or whatever those hand percussions are. You might be some distance like this, maybe say half a foot away, and you want some air to breathe from it. With a lot of electronic music, you don't get that space. So I like to basically group everything and send it to its own bus, if you will. And I just put a bit of reverb on that to kind of create that fake room space, if you like. And then I generally treat it with the same style of EQ. What I do is I cut off loads of the bottom information that I don't need, because with the Percs, I kind of just want the high shimmer of the sounds, you know, the glitter, the sparkle that makes it sound real nice. So this is without. This is with the reverb and the EQ. So you can hear we've basically got that space that we've created with the reverb, and then we've taken a lot of the lower information away from it, so it's not going to be affecting the snare, the lower end of the hi-hats or the kick, and we're just going to get that nice sparkle of those instruments come through in our mix, and just shine through at the top end of that drum part. We've filtered up to 125. We've got a boost around about 5.2. So normally you want to boost somewhere between 5 and 8, and that's where the sparkle and the shimmer is going to be. So I'm boosting around 5 here, because those percussive elements are sounding quite low pitched anyway. Nice, let's move on. The last part of the drum part are our hats, and I've pretty much treated those the same. So this is our hat part. And this with the EQ. Okay, now strictly speaking, with hi-hats, what you would do is you get rid of most of the information below 600 hertz and higher, depending on what kind of hi-hats you're using, the size or the sound source, whether it's dry, whether it's bright, whether you're looking for a more poppy or a jazzy sound. Everything below 600 is going to kind of be redundant in terms of the overall sound you're trying to get. So as you can see, I've used my filter and I've filtered up to around about 900, because I want that typical kind of thin hi-hat sound specific for, I guess, this kind of hip-hop drill genre. It's not a boom bap style hip-hop or a kind of East Coast or West Coast styles of hip-hop where the hi-hats have weight and they're kind of driving it. It's got much more of kind of like a pierced, dancey, light, airy type of feel to it. So I've filtered that quite a lot. So the second band here, I basically want to avoid the bit that sounds a bit like a dustbin lid. It's unnatural, it's clunky, it's clicky, it's a bit lower in pitch. It's not what I want. And when I find that, I basically then duck it down. And that's exactly what I've done here. So without it, it's just helped get rid of that thickness and just keep it sounding a bit more sharp. And then with the next band, we've basically looked anywhere between the 6 and the 10 kilohertz range for the bit that's kind of shimmery and shiny and got that chick to it, that really thin high chick that makes it sound really nice and cut through the mix. And we've just boosted that slightly, so we're around about 7.5 8 kilohertz, and we've just boosted that slightly. It's quite dull with brightens it up a little bit. We've done the same for the second hi-hat. Only difference is where we've boosted in the higher end, we're boosting more sympathetically to this specific hi-hat sound. Again, we've just found that presence and shimmer, that chick, if you will, and we've just dialed that up. And we'll just play the drum part all together so you guys can hear it in context. We'll just play it alongside the rest of the track and against the bass so you can hear those elements that we spoke about and what they would normally play against and how they're standing out against those other weightier parts in the frequency range from the other instruments. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. It's just a basic rundown of EQ basics and principles with regards to approaching your drum mix and your approach to EQ when EQing a drum part. So we looked at EQing kick, snare, hats and percs, your main elements of a drum mix like this that isn't a live part. Obviously, if we were mixing live drums, we might have the overheads in there and we'd be having a look at that. Today, within these principles are all applicable to the live drum environment too. I've taken from the live drum environment, put it into this environment, and I've tweaked it slightly based on what I want from my sound within this drum part. But if you concentrate on those bands within those instruments and their frequency ranges, you will be in a great starting position, getting your mix more musical and your parts standing out in the mix against other heavily processed instruments that they would normally clash with. Again, if you liked it, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, all that good stuff. Take it easy. Peace.